Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers out there in the audience. Today we're going to have a discussion, a conversation, if you will, Philip DeFranco style. You know, it's not just a show, it's a conversation about what went down with the Twitter files release. For those of you who are unaware, Matt Taibbi was given information by one Elon Musk, the new owner of Twitter, about what went into the decision to censor the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story, despite the fact that it was 100% true. Obviously, the story dropped in October of 2020, and this was a big October surprise. Now, obviously, whenever you have a story like this in October leading up to an election, it has the chance to impact the election, yet this was blocked from being shared on Twitter, and it was restricted on Facebook, and we know from the Joe Rogan interview that Mark Zuckerberg was essentially told, or people at Facebook were essentially told, that there could be some Russian disinformation coming out ahead of the election, but now we know the full extent of it. However, we're not really going to cover just that portion of the story. We have to cover the left-wing spin, because the left wing has decided to go after Matt Taibbi, because whenever you don't like the message, just shoot the messenger, and also pretend that there is nothing to this story. It was no big deal. Twitter essentially giving an in-kind contribution to the Biden administration. Nothing to see here. Don't worry about it. And chief among the liars is, of course, the Young Turks. But before we get into this video, before we get into the hypocrisy, before we debunk, destroy, deflate, de-boost everything that Anna Kasparian has to offer, we have a sponsor for today's video. So let me chuck it to the sponsor. Then I'll bring it back over here and we'll discuss everything on the other side. You'll be so amazed. If your New Year's resolution, like nearly half of people in the United States of America, is to be a healthier person overall, then I have something for you. And of course, what I'm talking about is this amazing powder over at Keto with Justice. This powder can help elevate the level of ketones in your body, which helps with weight management and can help prolong a state of ketosis if you're on the keto diet. And luckily for you, you can get it for 51% off at ketowithjustice.com. 60-day money-back guarantee, 51% off. Meet those New Year's resolution goals finally.
I think we've seen quite a bit that's useful. It's not really the smoking gun we'd hoped for. I feel that Elon Musk has held back some material.
You just heard from a columnist over at the New York Post. Her name is Miranda Devine, and she flat out says that the so-called Twitter files, meaning the information that Elon Musk leaked or gave to Matt Taibbi, who then put together a lengthy Twitter thread, ended up really being a big nothing burger. Certainly not the smoking gun that the right wing was hoping for.
So I will say right off the bat that the Twitter story, even though it's interesting, even though it's compelling, even though it gave us some information that we did not have before, it was largely underwhelming. As for the government, didn't seem to be actively trying to censor the Hunter Biden laptop story. In fact, what we actually saw from members of the government was that they contacted Twitter and all these social media companies and told them specifically that there was going to be some Russian disinformation related to Hunter Biden well in advance of the story being dropped. So essentially, this was an example of them preempting a story that they knew was legitimate because, of course, the government did have the Hunter Biden laptop hard drive in 2019, so they knew about this well before, and that was effectively how they preempted the story, and that is what went into it. Also, the way that this story was delivered by Matt Taibbi, not great. The Twitter thread was ridiculous. It took way too long. He didn't even have it all pre-written. It seemed like he was writing it as it went along. However, there was interesting information there, but the way that Anna Kasparian is spinning it is quite questionable, quite dubious, and it relies on members of her audience, which, by the way, if you're watching the Young Turks unironically, being incredibly dumb in order for it to be sold. So let's go into an example of that.
I do think it's important to talk about the ramifications of relying on a private company, private corporation to make these decisions about what content is and is not allowed on their platform. Because if Twitter truly is considered or thought of as the public square, well, I think there should be a lot more transparency in regard to what is and is not censored. However, the notion that the government got involved in censoring content on Twitter, meaning the Biden administration got involved in censoring content on Twitter, is unfounded as the story stands today.
So again, we really need to understand timelines so we can understand what's going on in this event, Because you have Anna Kasparian right there making the claim that this is no big deal because the Biden administration was not involved in the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story. But the thing is, the thing that you should really know if you're, covering the news, is that in October of 2020, there was no Biden administration. There was a Biden campaign, but he was not the president. Trump was the president. And what was interesting about this is that Trump's national security apparatus was essentially working against him, preempting the potential leak of the Hunter Biden laptop story. Now, to be clear, this story was 100% true, despite what Anna Kasparian says right here in this clip.
Let's start with the context and what this is really about for the right wing. It centers on the New York Post and the Hunter Biden laptop story that was published just weeks prior to the 2020 election taking place. So in October of 2020, again, before Biden was elected, just weeks before Election Day, the Post published a salacious story about the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop. The information came to them via Rudy Giuliani. Now, at the time that story broke, the laptop story was met with skepticism, I think for obvious reasons, right?
This was actually not that suspicious. The New York Post gave us a timeline of how they obtained the story, how they obtained the information, where it all came from. We had everything we needed to authenticate the story, and the federal government actually had possession of the drive from a year prior, so they knew it was authentic. The only thing that was suspicious was the fact that Twitter appeared to just be applying, for no reason, even though we know it's for partisan reasons, their hacked materials policy to what was clearly and never actually alleged to be hacked materials. In fact, we have exchanges from people at Twitter saying that this definitely doesn't fit. People that were uncomfortable with the fact that Twitter was putting their thumb on the scale. And one of the people that were behind this, it appears, was Vidya, the woman who went on with Tim Pool and Joe Rogan to cheer on the censorship regime. So they knew it wasn't hacked materials. This is what is being revealed by the Twitter documents. They knew that this could have serious implications on the election. However, they used as a justification a message or contact from the US government in order to censor this because they were told in advance that maybe something from Russia's coming related to Hunter Biden. Don't worry about it. Definitely cut it off.
Number one, it's Rudy Giuliani, of all people, who's coming to the public with this information. And Rudy Giuliani, I think, needless to say, has got some issues, some credibility issues, including consistently claiming that the election was stolen from Donald Trump, consistently claiming that he has evidence to prove it, and consistently failing to provide a shred of evidence that the election was in fact stolen from Donald Trump.
So here you have Anna Kasparian trying to poison the well on Rudy Giuliani, who was actually the source of the hard drive being delivered to the New York Post, saying that he had some real credibility issues, and honestly, we shouldn't trust him because remember what he said about the election. It makes perfect sense for Twitter in October of 2020 to say, wow, remember what Rudy Giuliani said about the presidential election after November of 2020. Wow, we definitely shouldn't trust him. We should definitely censor it, despite the fact that the New York Post has authenticated the story. And obviously, it was never in dispute. And obviously, this was never a hacked material situation, as Twitter laid it out. So no, Anna, you're completely wrong. You're poisoning the well is not going to fool me. Anybody who understands the timeline of events can understand that if you have issues with Rudy Giuliani's credibility just based on his response to the 2020 election, that you could not have seen his response post-2020 election prior to the 2020 election. And one of the reasons why people are so sketched out about elections in this country is obviously you have government actors, even from within the Trump administration, poisoning the well and contacting social media companies in order to undercut potential positive narratives for President Trump and negative narratives for people like Joe Biden. So no, Anna, that's absurd. That's ridiculous. You're a liar. You're not focusing on the issue. Gee, I wonder why. It's because you are in favor of government actors poisoning the well at these private companies, pushing for censorship of information as long as it gets you to your desired electoral outcomes.
So credibility issues there.
Credibility issues there. Again, Anna, what does this have to do with anything as far as October of 2020? The New York Post published everything they needed to publish about the authentication of the materials. They published exactly how they obtained these materials It did not violate the hacked materials policy. However, the social media companies were tipped off in advance by agents of the federal government that some misinformation and disinformation were coming. And by the way, another thing that was revealed in the Twitter files was that a bunch of politicians and a bunch of organizations actually have backdoors into these social media companies. And some of this was revealed before, but they were using it in order to push for censorship of stuff that they didn't like. Perfect example of this is former Secretary of State, current governor-elect, and cat lady Katie Hobbs, who had been sending requests as far back as 2021, according to what's available now, trying to pull misinformation, or what she calls misinformation, information she doesn't like, down from social media companies. Also, it is not in dispute that people within the Biden administration today, not talking back in 2020 when there was no Biden administration, are trying to put their thumb on the scale and are pushing for censorship on social media. We had the lawsuit with Alex Berenson, where he got, through discovery, contact information from government officials demanding that Twitter remove him from their platform. This is why he was reinstated, because he sued for breach of contract, and through the discovery process, he found out that the Biden administration was targeting him.
So you can understand the skepticism. He also refused to share the source material with news outlets. So the credibility issues, the lack of source material, it was easy to dismiss that story.
No, Anna, you're lying. That is an outright lie. Even the Twitter internal communications knew that this was not hacked materials, which is the justification that they used in order to censor it, and it was not easy to dismiss this story. It was all out there. The New York Post did their sourcing properly. Anybody who had any legitimate concern for the truth knew that this was a legitimate, authentic piece of material. So, Anna, it was not easy to dismiss the story, or in fact, it was easy to dismiss the story if you're a partisan hack who is only looking forward to getting rid of Orange Man, no matter what tactics that you are willing to utilize in order to reach that goal.
But the information coming out of the laptop story has since been verified as legitimate. So what's fair is fair, and we should be clear about that.
So what's fair is fair, and we should just say that. Now that we're, 700 something days later, we could say that it was all authentic. I mean, we suppressed it, and there was a coordinated effort by outlets to not distribute this story, even though it was legitimate.
Now, outlets chose not to aggregate the Post report and followed warnings from former U.S. intelligence officials, that's an important key word here, who signed a letter saying that the Hunter data had all the markings of a Russian disinformation campaign.
There were no serious questions about the story when it came out at the time. They were all nonsensical, and even the social media companies that were blocking distribution of it knew that there was no legitimate justification for it. But it turned out to be true, so don't worry about it. I mean, censor first, then the consequences happen, and then we say, oh, whoopsie, sorry about that, no big deal. I mean, remember when BuzzFeed ran with the Steele dossier, despite the fact that they didn't have anything authenticated, and then they put in a paragraph at the beginning of the story that, oh, we didn't authenticate it, but we wanted to put it out in the public just so the world could see. No big deal, don't worry about it, A+ first class all the way, BuzzFeed is great. Well, in this case, they had everything authenticated from the jump. They had legitimate sourcing. The New York Post published all of that material so anybody could see it. They sent it to other news organizations so that they could verify the veracity of the story, but they decided that they weren't going to do it. The social media companies decided that they were going to censor it because the goal at the time was to get rid of Orange Man, and Anna Kasparian is okay with it. Anna Kasparian supports censorship as long as it gets the desired electoral outcomes.
Now, the reason why I say former US intelligence is important is because if it's current US intelligence that's badgering Twitter or other social media platforms to censor certain content, well, a case could be made that the government's getting involved in censoring speech, and that does run into some potential issues with the Constitution, the First Amendment.
Again, go look at the Twitter files yourself and you'll find out that people from within the government, prior to the story being released to the public, sent a warning to the social media companies that there was maybe an election surprise along the way related to Hunter Biden, and it was Russian disinformation. And as far as Anna trying to say, former intelligence officials, as long as you're in good standing post leaving the government, going into the private sector, you maintain your security clearance. So you are still technically an intelligence official. If you were ever to come back into government, you wouldn't have to reapply for your security clearance. You actually are given access to a whole host of information. And if you're in the private sector, you are still treated largely like an intelligence official. I have people in my audience that were in the U.S. Armed Forces that went into the intelligence sphere, and they didn't have to re-get their qualifications based on their downtime in the civilian market. They ended up getting their security clearance through the military and using that to do intelligence work in the private sector. So all of these people who are liars and partisan hacks who wanted to get rid of President Trump signed this BS letter about this being Russian disinformation. They gave themselves some plausible deniability, and for some reason, these people with no authority on the subject were able to override the New York Post sourcing and reporting, which of course bared fruit, turned out to be 100% true time and time again, and we knew it was true immediately. We knew it was true after the questions were answered for 2 days, and that was the ambiguous period, and Anna's trying to pretend like, oh, well, we just found out recently that it was true, because again, she's in favor of the censorship. She's in favor of the authoritarian regime controlling what you see.
So Twitter did get involved. First, the platform suspended the Twitter account of the Post. It also deleted and suspended anyone who shared the story. Twitter eventually reversed that decision and reactivated the New York Post Twitter account, along with countless others banned from sharing the Hunter Biden story. Now, Kayleigh McEnany, who at the time was the White House press secretary, was also suspended from Twitter. And so that led to a lot of backlash.
Twitter just suspended the New York Post and anybody sharing this, and then they blocked the link from even being shared in DMs. But don't worry about it. They eventually reversed that decision. No big deal. Don't worry about when they reversed that decision, because of course that was after the election. So once the story couldn't do them damage, once they got the guy in office that they wanted, then they reversed it, and Anna Kasparian doesn't even think that's significant enough to tell you that they waited till after the election to reverse the ban on individuals and organizations that were sharing true information, including a publication that I believe was founded by Alexander Hamilton. Absurd, ridiculous. Again, Anna, you're such a hack. You're such a fraud. This is such an easy thing because there's no consequences of acknowledging what went wrong back then, but you can't even do that because that's how authoritarian you've become.
And to be quite honest, the Hunter Biden laptop story that was censored by Twitter got a lot, in my opinion, a lot more attention as a result of it being censored from the platform.
This is such nonsense. So yes, among right-wing media, the Hunter Biden laptop story did get a lot more attention. People did focus on it more because they were focusing on the censorship component of it. However, in terms of normal people, in terms of the everyday people that interact with social media posts on Facebook and on Twitter, they didn't really get to see what went down. So yeah, we're still talking about it because of the censorship, because it was that big of a moment in our American history and in the history of the 2020 election. But everyday people from October to November did not interact with this story on its own due to the fact that there was an overwhelming censorship push from the left wing, which had the groundwork laid for it by people acting from within the government.
Now, then Twitter's CEO, Jack Dorsey, admitted during congressional testimony that they had made a mistake and they had, if they could do it all over again, they would have gone in a completely different direction. They would have handled it differently. And here's a part of Matt Taibbi's long Twitter thread on all of this that I think is the most relevant, okay? So he says, slowly over time, Twitter staff and executives began to find more and more uses for these tools. Outsiders began petitioning the company to manipulate speech as well. First a little, then more often, then consistently. By 2020, requests from connected actors to delete tweets were routine. One executive would write to another, more to review from Biden team, meaning his campaign team. The reply would come back handled. Okay, so far we're talking about Biden's campaign. He's not president yet, so the idea that the White House is meddling in free speech is, again, unfounded.
Oh, well, it's no big deal. Biden honestly, he wasn't even in office yet. It was just his campaign team. So the idea that Twitter and all these social media companies were working with the Biden campaign, probably violating campaign finance laws, because I don't know if you guys know this, giving something of value to a campaign, even if it's not money, is considered an in-kind contribution, is no big deal. Remember the Young Turks' mission statement? Remember the Young Turks' main goal in politics? Getting the corporations working with the politicians out of there. We got to get money out of politics, big corporate influence out of politics. But here you have Anna right there saying, no big deal. I mean, it was only the Biden administration and the Biden campaign, and they didn't do that. I mean, ignore them post them actually being elected, doing the same thing and using government power in order to do so. Don't worry about it. They would just censor on behalf of the Biden team. Who even really cares? Wow, wow, wow. No big deal. I'm Anna Kasparian. This is my journalism on the Young Turks.
And it doesn't matter, though, because Elon Musk weighed in on this and he says the following: if this isn't a violation of the Constitution's First Amendment, what is? By the way, further debunking this myth of billionaire meritocracy.
Anna is such a hack. Anna is such a fraud. Anna is so bad at her job. So she talks about a specific thing from the Twitter leaks, and then she goes to an Elon Musk tweet, not even talking about what it's referring to, and says, wow, that just proves Elon Musk doesn't know about the First Amendment. Well, Anna, how about this? Yoel Roth said that he censored the Hunter Biden laptop story. The reason that they were doing this is because they were contacted by people within the FBI because they gave them a heads up that there was going to be some Hunter Biden related Russian misinformation prior to the election. That was an absolute lie. That's the government interfering with the news, with the First Amendment. Even if you could say, oh, well, that was an innocent mistake and there must have been some other Hunter Biden related misinformation coming down the pipe that they were worrying about, that doesn't matter because intent is not what is relevant when you're talking about violations of the Constitution. So whoopsie is not a good excuse for the government putting their thumb on the scale. And again, Anna Kasparian and the Young Turks didn't cover the Alex Berenson story where the Biden administration was directly trying to get somebody banned because they were posting information they didn't like related to a pharmaceutical product.
It doesn't matter, though, because Elon Musk weighed in on this and he says the following: if this isn't a violation of the Constitution's First Amendment, what is? By the way, further debunking this myth of billionaire meritocracy. Debunking this myth of billionaire meritocracy.
Debunking the idea of billionaire meritocracy. Yeah, Anna, we're all buying that. We all believe that Anna Kasparian over at the Young Turks, somebody who was hired because she was a 20-year-old, basically willing to work for free, and ended up sticking around to being one of the most important people at this crummy network, is definitely more meritocratic than Elon Musk, a co-founder of PayPal and a co-founder of Tesla. And if you're one of those people who are like, well, actually, these two guys founded Tesla and Elon had nothing to do with it, remember, they had no models, no vehicles, no prototypes, almost no patents or anything like that until Elon Musk got on board. All they had was the name, then Elon Musk joined in. So they may have founded it on a Monday, but Elon Musk came in on Tuesday and turned it into a multi-billion-dollar company. But it's okay, because Anna Kasparian over at the Young Turks says that this debunks anything about billionaire merit.
Like, have you read the Constitution? Have you read the First Amendment? It's the government specifically censoring your speech. That is what's considered a violation of the First Amendment. That is not what happened here.
Anna, do us a favor. Stop trying to virtue signal. Stop trying to pretend that you're more knowledgeable than you actually are.
Now, the lack of transparency and the fact that you have campaigns censoring what content we're able to see is something that I'm concerned about, right? It would be much more important for us to know, how do they make these decisions? Why do they make these decisions? And these platforms are notorious for not being upfront, honest, and transparent about what's transpiring. But again, this has turned out to be more of what we've already known. And in terms of the smoking gun that the right wing was hoping for, they certainly haven't gotten it. And if they do, they haven't got. If they will in the future, they certainly haven't gotten it yet.
It's not the smoking gun that you wanted, right wing. You're done. I mean, it was a true story. It was censored by Twitter. The reason they said that they censored it in part is because they got messages from inside the federal government saying that there might be some misinformation related to Hunter Biden. This was 100% true, but it's no big deal that the government has all these back doors into the social media companies, and the social media companies overwhelmingly support and go with censorship when requested by the Democratic Party. That's not a big story. I don't know why you're even saying that. Trust me, we're not the bad guys here. Orange Man was definitely the bad guy.
Let's go to Taibbi's other tweet, because I think this is a really important part of it as well. This is the 22nd tweet in his lengthy thread where he writes, although several sources recalled hearing about a general warning from federal law enforcement that summer about possible foreign hacks, there's no evidence that I've seen of any government involvement in the laptop story. In fact, that might have been the problem. Okay, so no evidence of the government getting involved, but let me continue with the next tweet.
Serious question. If there are people from the TYT audience that accidentally stumbled on my video and made it this far, does it make you uncomfortable that Anna Kasparian thinks you're stupid? Does it make it uncomfortable for you that Anna Kasparian thinks that you're a fool and she could pull the wool over your eyes in order to slip one by you? So what this tweet is referring to is that there was a generalized warning about hacking related specifically to Hunter Biden over the summer. And when Matt Taibbi says one of the problems is that the government didn't get involved, this is because the FBI had possession of the laptop story. They knew that they could authenticate it if asked, and they never authenticated the story to the press. They never said it was real. In fact, we had people with security clearances going out of their way saying this has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation, when people within the government knew for a fact it was real, had possession of this a year prior to the New York Post having possession of this, and they refused to authenticate it. They refused to acknowledge its existence. So that is what is meant by that. There was a generalized warning, and then people refused in the government to authenticate what they knew was legitimate and already had possession of for a year.
Where he says, the decision was made at the highest levels of the company, but without the knowledge of CEO Jack Dorsey, with former head of legal, policy and trust, the policy and trust Vijaya God playing a key role. Okay, so I just think if it's the government, if it's really like FBI officials, really they're gonna go to lower level employees. They're not gonna talk to the CEO of the company at all. They're not gonna talk to Jack Dorsey at all.
So Vijaya Gadde is not a low level employee. Vijaya Gadde is not some nothing person. She's the head of legal over at Twitter. Apparently she was making around $30 million a year. She's the woman that appeared on that podcast with Rogan and Tim Pool.
Really, they're gonna go to lower level employees. They're not gonna talk to the CEO of the company at all. They're not gonna talk to Jack Dorsey at all.
But Anna Kasparian is making it seem like they went to an intern. And what this shows us, by the way, is that these censorship regimes and all that go around the founders of the company, because a lot of the founders of the company just want information to be distributed freely on their platforms, and they're not really involved in the day-to-day censorship operations. And this is one of the reasons why that before Elon bought it, Dorsey ended up setting down, and they brought in the Parag guy who actively is in favor of censorship. This is something that a lot of people don't realize, is that you have the founders, these like innovative kind of cats that end up starting these companies. And these guys are largely super libertarian. They want to explore the free and open internet. However, what ends up happening is corporate comes in and all these censorship people come in, like Vidya, who is essentially among the top people over at Twitter. And those are the people with the agendas. Those are the people interested in enforcing the nonsense. So Anna Kasparian tried to downplay this person as a nothing figure, a low-level employee, is absurd. Also, not every single content request is going to come in directly to the CEO. Obviously, they have the back door into the trust and safety team.
I found that a little strange, but let's continue. So the allegation is that the FBI went directly to like these lower level employees who deal with like the content moderation and what is and is not considered safe. Also worth pointing out that it wasn't just the Biden campaign. The Trump campaign was definitely involved as well. Let's go to the next graphic. This is another tweet from Taibbi's thread where he says both parties had access to these tools. For instance, in 2020, requests from both the Trump White House and the Biden campaign were received and honored. Then he says, however, and he provides the campaign donations that went from Twitter, people working at Twitter, to the different parties. And there were more campaign contributions to Democrats as opposed to Republicans. So his argument there is, well, the employees there obviously leaned more Democrat, so there was more favoritism toward the Biden campaign. But nonetheless, both campaigns, meaning both parties, were consistently like contacting Twitter looking for content to be censored on the platform.
So again, Anna Kasparian, incredibly deceptive right there. Anna Kasparian lying by omission, trying to pull the wool over her own audience's eyes, because that is not what was just linked to randomly after the fact. And by the way, the donations from Twitter employees to the Democrats is something like 98%. It's overwhelmingly to Democrats. But the tweet following the however wasn't just a screenshot of the donations or this argument. It was about how the Democrats had more requests and they had more channels than the Republicans in order to censor information. So yes, if there was misinformation or disinformation, there was a way for these campaigns and politicians to contact the social media companies to make those requests. But what Taibbi points out is that there was a huge partisan bias within the company, specifically within this team, and there was a whole back channel that Democrats had access to, or a bunch of back channels that they had access to, that the Republicans did not have access to. Quote, "This system wasn't balanced. It was based on context. And because Twitter was and is overwhelmingly staffed by people of one political orientation, there were more channels, more ways to complain, open to the left, well, the Democrats, than the right."
Now, it's also worth noting that many of the links the Biden team asked Twitter to remove were actually like pornographic links from the Hunter Biden laptop. So embarrassing stuff about Hunter Biden. Again, I think the nature of wanting to censor something draws more attention to it. So, I mean, I saw some of those images. I don't really care about it.
So again, this is part of the misinformation from the left, that they're claiming that everything that the Republicans were posting related to the Hunter Biden story was about salacious images. All you have to do is look at any of the articles published by the New York Post. Yes, they had images to prove that this was authentic of Hunter Biden from his own computer, but the information was about his connections to foreign businesses and possibly that 10 or 20% for the big guy. But get a load where Anna Kasparian takes this after saying, oh, it was all about Hunter Biden penis pictures. No real information in here.
I just don't think, I mean, what power does Hunter Biden have? Hunter Biden is not like Ivanka Trump or Jared Kushner or Don Jr., family members that Donald Trump intentionally brought on to serve as advisors or, part of his cabinet in the White House. That is not what's happening with Joe Biden and his son Hunter. So why do I care?
That's exactly what was being alleged about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, that Hunter was getting all of these jobs in China, in Ukraine. He was getting all of this money in industries and fields that he had no experience in. And this was due to the fact that he was peddling the influence from his father while he was the vice president. That whole thing about 10 or 20% from the big guy. All of this was in there. So Anna Kasparian, again, lying directly to her audience, trying to pretend that a huge component of this story wasn't pay to play with Hunter Biden, just saying, oh, it's a penis picture, ha ha ha, no big deal, don't worry about it. Please don't look at the misinformation that I'm spreading to you guys. This is totally fine. And remember, the Trump campaign sometimes requested for stuff to be removed, and really what the Biden administration wanted censored, what they really wanted censored were unfair nudes of Hunter. I mean, golly gee willikers, Anna Kasparian can't figure out if there was any kind of corruption element related to the laptop story. Wow, I don't even care. Why would I even care about it? I'm Anna Kasparian. Welcome to the Young Turks.
Okay, so the guy had an addiction issue. So do many Americans. Like, why is this such a big deal? And why are Republicans so obsessed with investigating it in the House? I mean, go for it, I guess. I mean, I don't really care. I have no loyalty to Hunter Biden. He's not my daddy.
Hunter was just an addict. He was addicted. He was just addicted to drugs. Again, why are Republicans trying to investigate his addiction? Who even cares? Burisma? I mean, Biden firing a prosecutor, holding $1 billion of US taxpayer money? I don't even know what that is. It's like the Republicans just want to investigate the nudes of Hunter Biden and the fact that he was a drug addict. I don't understand. And I'm Anna Kasparian. I have no loyalty to Hunter Biden. I'm just lying about the contents of the story for no reason right now other than the fact that I have pledged allegiance to the Democratic Party, and I'm trying to pretend like that's not the case.
I mean, go for it, I guess. I mean, I don't really care. I have no loyalty to Hunter Biden. He's not my daddy. I'm not like right-wingers who are like on their knees, like doing what they can to protect and show love to their elite. I don't care about any of that. If there's any wrongdoing, great, investigate him. What do I care? What I do care about is what kind of representation are we getting from our elected officials, people that we elected into positions of power to represent us. That's what matters here, right? And in terms of, First Amendment violations, there's still no evidence of that whatsoever.
Again, Anna's just concerned about our representatives and what they're representing, and there's no evidence at all whatsoever of First Amendment violations or anything like that. Ignore the lawsuits that revealed the Biden administration trying to censor social media. Ignore the fact that they tried to set up a misinformation governance board with, by the way, somebody who has come out as a foreign agent at the head of it, and now that board is under Kamala Harris. No evidence at all. What censorship? What even is that? I'm Anna Kasparian. This is my legitimate coverage of the Hunter Biden story. It seems like it was just about Republicans making fun of his addiction.
Finally, I do want to go to one more video because I just find it so fascinating how many people on the right, prominent members of the media, have just flat out admitted the truth, which in this case, this is not the smoking gun that they were hoping for, right?
Now look, overall, I did not like the way that this information was distributed out to the public. I think Matt Taibbi's long thread over the course of an hour was ridiculous and absurd. And I'm also willing to acknowledge that although there's some sketchy stuff in here, this is largely stuff that we all knew about based on other leaks and other reporting related to the story. We already knew that the Hunter Biden laptop story was true. We already knew that Twitter and Facebook were censoring it, and we heard from Zuckerberg that they got tips from the federal government about misinformation, and the only thing that this really clarified, and by the way, this was actually clarified by Yoel Roth, so even that's not new, is the fact that that information specifically mentioned Hunter Biden and Russian hacking, and don't worry about it, probably should do something censory back in the summer of 2020. So we had all this information available to us more or less. This is just the documentation affirming it. And honestly, it wasn't that huge of a reveal, although it's interesting to see how this all went down. And it's very interesting to see how the left is reacting to this, because they've smeared Matt Taibbi, they smeared Elon Musk, they try to pretend it doesn't exist, they try to downplay it, and their big strategy is to downplay everything that's important about the story and pretend that this was all about sharing nudes or making fun of the addiction of Hunter Biden. And of course, Anna Kasparian, being the hack fraud that she is a participant in this propaganda in order to undermine the fact that Twitter and all these social media companies, after receiving tips from the intelligence community inside the government in the summer of 2020, censored a true story in order to aid Biden in his election campaign. Blocked people from sharing it, de-boosted it, banned people for sharing it, and it all turned out to be true. And the idea that they restored their accounts well after the election does not change the fact that they did this, and this likely, whenever you have an election as close as Biden-Trump 2020, could have tipped the scales. Remember, the margin of victory in the 3 key swing states in the 2020 election was thinner than the margin of victory in 2016. So you could look at the vote total of 85 million versus whatever million that Trump got and say, wow, big margin of victory for Biden. But in reality, based on the Electoral College, it all comes down to the swing states, and we're looking at a difference of about 30,000 votes. You think 30,000 people could have encountered this story and thought to themselves, holy crap, Hunter Biden is going around to these foreign countries and collecting money and holding 10 to 20% for the big guy, which is likely Joe Biden. Maybe I should change how I vote because corruption is a big problem. Yeah, they did that. It had an impact, or it potentially had an impact, and we should all be concerned about members of the intelligence community, both within it at the time over at the FBI and post leaving it, who still have security clearances, willing to lie to achieve the political outcomes that they want. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Maybe you agree with Anna Kasparian that it's no big deal and we should be fine with a censorship regime that aids the Democratic Party because Orange Man bad. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show them by leaving a like. Subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social medias. Support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about Anna Kasparian's reaction to the Twitter files. Till next time.